I think I'm saying that we struggle all our lives to answer it. That it's the struggle that is important. That's what helps us to define our place in the universe.
This is Beverly, Dr. Beverly, Dr. Beverly Crusher. Honest,
Forceful,
trusting,
brilliant,
strong.
and adventurous.
And this is Crusher Convo. Hey guys, and welcome to Crusher Convo, where we are crushing the conversation one episode at a time. I am super excited because I have a special interview with Aaron Waltke from Star Trek Prodigy. I was very excited, as everyone else was, with season 2 because we got Wesley Crusher and we got Beverly Crusher and the reunion we've been wanting to see. So I was very honored that he was able to take his time and be able to have this interview with me. So here it is, guys. Enjoy. Welcome, Aaron, and thank you for joining me today. Here at Crusher Convo, we love to crush the conversation one episode at a time, and you guys definitely crushed it with season 2 in more ways than one.
Well, on behalf of the whole team, thank you. That means a lot. You know, especially there are elements of this season that I think we were gearing towards fans of the Crusher family. So I'm glad that
We
we
appreciate that.
meet
Thank you.
your seal of approval.
Yes. Now, you have explained about how the process went down for season 2 when you were on Larry Nemechek's show, and you mentioned that Wesley was the pitch for season 2. So why was it so important for you guys to bring Wesley back and create the story around his character?
Well, there's a few sort of elements involved in the decision, you know, because something we've always said in Star Trek Prodigy is like we don't really have just the nature of how much it costs to even build a model and cast someone and stuff. It's not
Right.
it's not our interest to cast someone lightly. You know, if they're going to be their character is going to be brought into our show, we not only want it to have a profound influence on our main characters, the Prodigy crew, but we also want the story of our season to affect those characters and have it be a meaningful experience for them. So when it came to, you know, how can we kind of expand, I guess, the purview of our show, you know, as people have pointed out, perhaps rightfully so, it is very Voyager heavy because obviously when you have Kate Mulgrew, you would take advantage of that. And also,
Correct. Yes.
and also when you have the character of Admiral Janeway, you know, it does take, it makes sense to us that she would rely on people that she knew, and it would be a disservice to not go that direction. But for season 2, we wanted to capitalize, I think, in part on our own decision very from the beginning is like we don't want this to be a Voyager sequel. We want this to be a sequel to all of Star Trek, you know. And that's part of our mandate to introduce new and young audiences to everything that makes Star Trek great. And that includes like fun original science fiction concepts, but it also, you know, lightly or sometimes not so lightly means, hey, there's 60 years of other TV shows out there, and some of them are very good, and you should go check those out as well. So that was kind of our thinking. It was like, okay, let's who else can we kind of bring in that would make sense and wouldn't feel shoehorned in? And obviously, a big part of our season was dealing with the complexities and unintended consequences of time travel, and especially with the business with Future Solum and that the Diviner coming from an alternate timeline and crossing over into ours, we were like, gosh, we really need someone who's an expert in this sort of thing. And I think one of our writer producers, Jen Murrow, said it first, but it was like 3 seconds ahead of me. We almost at the same time were like, Wesley Crusher. You know, who better to guide these young people through the Gordian knot of temporal timey-wimey nonsense that they found than the original Prodigy? And that it really made sense to us because Wesley, in many ways, kind of represented kind of what the next generation was trying to do in terms of reaching young people and showing them grow into, you know, their own role, whether it belongs with Starfleet or not. The parallels were too obvious to us to not see the potential for a sort of both kind of like a Virgil, who guides Dante through,
Yeah.
through the afterlife, but also
Right.
a mentorship of sorts, and also a ghost of Christmas future in a way of like, if you
Oh,
if you rise, if you ascend to your potential, you could
yeah.
be somebody like Wesley Crusher. But
Right.
we also didn't want to have Wesley just be like a god. He's not a Q. He's a person
Hmm.
that has just sort of achieved the next ascended state of humanity in a way. And that's what the Traveler had sort of alluded to throughout TNG, and it was this sort of like dangling question mark for a lot of Star Trek fans' minds of like,
Oh,
well,
yeah.
what's going on with that?
Right.
um,
Right.
so it all became sort of just kismet of like, there's too many factors that work together for our show that not
Uh-huh.
only would it slot in nicely, but it actually would help our show a lot through
Right.
the themes of this season, that it made complete sense to us.
Oh yeah, the puzzle pieces just fit perfectly. Like you said, he's the original Prodigy and he knows about time travel and time and space and things like that. Now I'm actually new to the fandom. Just started watching it in 2022. TNG was my
Wow.
gateway. Yeah.
Well,
And then I
welcome.
just I just dove right in, and here's a podcast and all this stuff. But I fell in love with Beverly Crusher because of she represented single moms. That's who I was and stuff like that. So it was nice to see that. And I also really enjoyed Wesley. And so it was really nice, especially a lot of the Crusher fans, they've been waiting, like, where's Wesley? Like, where's Wesley? We've been wanting this to see what has he been doing since he left the Next Generation. I even said, like, we have a little snippet in Nemesis, but it kind of doesn't exist because he was just at the wedding table and that was it, right? So
Right.
technically we don't really know what's been going on, but one of the things that I saw when I was watching season 2 of Prodigy was that, the timelines collapsing and the loom erasing existence. It kind of reminded me of Star Trek Coda, the book Coda, and where Wesley was also pivotal to the story. So are you a fan of the expanded universe with the Star Trek books?
So I really like the expanded universe of Star Trek books,
Hmm.
certainly. And one of the writers of Coda, David Mack, is a friend, and he was a consultant on season 1 of Prodigy as we were kind of getting our footing.
Nice.
In terms of the Coda books specifically, we didn't have time to read them because we were so ankle deep in trying
Oh,
to
I bet. Yeah.
make Prodigy. But I've since even spoken with David. It was just like, how interesting that we, both given the same sandbox with the same toys of like,
Yeah.
and the same question mark, we kind of arrived at the same conclusions.
Hmm.
And in many ways, we were like, in my mind, at least, it confirms we must have gotten it right.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
and it was actually delightful to hear that they had arrived at similar conclusions to us.
Yeah. I think that helps too because you guys are such fans of the franchise. So you
Yes.
kinda understand just how it works a little bit, because you've been watching these characters for so long.
Yeah,
Now
absolutely.
I did get Doctor Who vibes when I was watching with the whole I think even Dal said timey-wimey at one point. I was like, "That's the
Yes.
Doctor." And Wesley's behavior was very, like, 11th Doctor to me, that,
Mhm.
Matt Smith just kinda all over the place. Was the franchise an inspiration while you guys were writing this?
It was one of many. I think when
Yeah.
even Will himself has said, in his fan fiction, or sorry, in his head canon, and I think in some of his own fiction that he has written,
Mhm.
that I think was published in one of the anthologies, that in fact, he did picture Wesley Crusher as kind of becoming a force for good, traversing the multiverse, which
Right.
again is all drawn directly from canon, like even from the first appearance of the Traveler. I
Yeah.
think one of the Riker or someone says, "Are you from the future? Are you from another dimension?" And the Traveler just sort of like esoterically says, "Yes, something like that, as you would understand it."
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like clearly they're operating in realms far beyond ours, and
Mhm.
I was so excited for that next chapter that never quite came. And so
Yeah.
when we had the opportunity to bring Will back and kind of fulfill that and canonize in many ways, I think even what he had been picturing, um,
Mhm.
it was certainly a pleasure to do so, and it makes sense that like characters that spend most of their formative years, traversing the
Yeah.
multiverse with the power of their thoughts,
Right.
and trying to hold infinite timelines in their head at one time, they are going to probably be a little bit scatterbrained here or there,
Yes.
and as someone who has ADHD, I completely empathize and maybe put a little
My
bit in
daughter
there.
has ADHD. I was like, this is a typical Thursday.
Yeah, exactly. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a different way
No.
for your brain to be wired.
Yeah.
Um, and there were other elements at play as well. Like I think there was a moment where when Wesley first reveals himself, it's like, oh, I didn't realize we hadn't met yet.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of River Song in that, I suppose, but I think at the time when we put that in, it was actually a reference to T.S. White's Sword in the Stone, which I think was adapted at some point into a Disney film. But in the original book, they capitalize on an interesting element of Merlin, from lore, in that Merlin ages backwards. And so when
Oh,
Merlin,
interesting.
yeah, so when Merlin first meets our young Arthur, when he's just sort of a boy,
Yeah.
he said, Arthur's like, good to meet you, and then suddenly Merlin is startled and he's like, oh, this is so sad, this is the last time we'll see each other, and so like that sort of backwards
Oh no, I am
thinking.
giving River Song vibes.
Right, yeah, I
Yeah.
think River Song borrowed from that, but we were definitely
Yeah.
thinking, I guess, the inspiration even for that when we kind of wrote some of those elements in.
Yeah. And even Wesley did say, he's like, no one likes spoilers. So I was all,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
just getting a lot of it, right?
that was River Song. No, there's
That
no
was so,
question.
we appreciate that too, because there is a lot of fans who love not only Star Trek, but like Beverly Crusher and stuff like that, but are huge River Song fans. So we were
Yeah.
having so much fun when we were watching this season. Now, the reunion of Beverly and Wesley was so special for us because we were so sad with season 3 of Picard because Wesley wasn't there. We didn't know what was going on. She's saying she's, lost a son. And we're like, what happened? So that reunion, how special was it for you guys to be able to bring it to life?
It was wonderful. It was kind of kismet in a way, because we were already thinking about, we'd already pitched the season to the network of like, this is what we want to do with the season. Timey-wimey, they have they have Wesley Crusher as their mentor, and when we pitched out the story for Wesley, we said, he's someone who effectively has become sort of untethered from his own life in a way, in that
Right.
he's just like a captain might be married to the sea. He's become sort of married to the cosmos, and he spends every waking moment trying to protect the people from his former life, but in doing
Yeah.
so, he's kind of forgotten how to live. And so we thought, wouldn't it be nice to at least have the events of this season and the characters he interacts with kind of remind him that, like, you don't have to sacrifice everything about yourself and your former life. And who better to sort of embody that than him reconnecting with his family. And so when season 2 of Picard rolled around, they obviously were dealing with the supervisors and that sort of thing. And then as they were approaching the end of writing season 2 of Picard, they said, "Hey, we know you're using Wesley. Um, we'd like for them to meet a traveler." And it feels like it would be strange if it was just a random person. Could it be Wesley? And we were like, this seems like a great opportunity, if anything, because your show is going to come out first. It will almost be like a teaser for what's to come.
Yeah.
So to Akiva Goldsman's great credit, he wrote a version of the monologue, sent it to us. I had a chance to polish it and work in specific references to our show and align it with to how Wesley was in our show. Although that's, in a way, that could almost serve as like a coda of like, okay, he's learning to reconnect. He's bringing people back in. He's not doing it by himself. And then as Picard season 3 rolled around, obviously Beverly is such a big part of that, and she kind of makes allusions to how she's kind of lost her son to the cosmos. And so we had a number of long conversations with Terry about, like, okay, what is the timeline? What's the story here? And thankfully Terry Metalis was completely on board of like, I see the bittersweet beauty of at least having this reunion, even if it's the last
Yeah.
one for a while.
Mhm.
And so we wanted him to see his mother, certainly. And then when Jack came into the picture, we were like, well, we have to have Jack there because like
Yeah.
that, if what's, it reminded us of just sort of like if you have a relative who's like in the military or something and then comes home and
Yeah.
gets to meet a young one for the first time. It felt very,
Right.
very poetic to us.
Yeah.
From a production standpoint, we didn't have the money to build a Jack model as a toddler,
Yeah. Yeah.
but we were like, actually, I think it would be even more beautiful if you stay on Wesley's face and
The excitement. Yeah.
yeah, as he sees what he's been missing and
Mhm.
meets Jack for the first time, and you can really hear the emotion in Gates and Will's voices as they act out
You
the
do.
scene that clearly they have been thinking about, for a while. you
Yeah.
know, it was a beautiful scene and beautifully acted and directed. I'm so glad that it turned out as well as it did.
I think this was good for them because I know they expressed how they didn't get a lot of scenes in the next generation, right? Because Wesley always kind of deferred to the male characters in a lot of sense, even though Beverly was the one that raised him. But it was very special for them to be able to do this scene because they didn't really get a lot of that. I think
Yeah.
Gates always expressed how she was like, I really just wanted some good scenes with my sons, both of them. I mean, she did get some good ones. It was only 10 episodes. They could only do so much. But for
Mhm.
Next Generation, she just felt like there was, not enough in that aspect. So I think you guys just put a perfect little bow on that story that they've wanted to do for so long. Did Will and Gates have anything to say with these characters of how they wanted to do it, especially since, Will was so important to the story?
Oh, absolutely. You'll have to ask Will if you can ever get him on the podcast. But you know, when we wrote a draft for him to look at and say, does this feel right to you?
Yeah.
And for the most part, he was like, this is great. But he just had a few little, touches to the lines and punch ups
Mhm.
that I was like, oh, what a great resource that Will is also a writer. So he can kind of like, he can, put some of that in there. Like I think it was a lot of really small things of just sort of like I think at one point he's like, it's going to draw, they're going to be drawn to us like a subspace beacon or something like that. It's like, oh, that's a
Yeah.
fun little grace note, sort of
Mhm.
harkening back to Will or to Wesley's sort of experience as sort of like a gadget obsessed young man aboard a starship. Of
Yeah.
course, he would use analogies like that. Um,
Right.
and I think the first version we had written, he's like, it feels very Doctor and I love it, but it's like, I want to say he was like, it feels more like the 8th Doctor and I want him to be more like the 10th or 11th or something like that. And so we kind of
Yes.
took that note and we
Yeah.
made it work. And then
Those are
Gates
my
also,
doctors, so
yeah,
yeah.
and Gates McFadden also, had some very astute things to contribute. She obviously
Mhm.
helped us out in season 1 in an episode that I had written called Kobayashi, where she came in
Yeah.
as the sort of holographic version of herself.
Right.
Um, and then when we brought her in for this, she read the sides, and she just was like, I just want to double check, and so we wound up hopping on a call with Terry just to make sure. And it turned out, I think there was like one line where we didn't realize it, but it implied, I think, that Wesley would come and visit her all the time, and she was like, I don't think that's true to the character or the relationship as we see it in Picard. And we were like, we
Mhm.
totally agree. That's not what we were trying to imply. so they were all very much on board and actively contributing to make sure that this moment wouldn't be distracted by sort of, canon obsessed like timeline stuff, and just be able to
Right.
embrace it as the Crusher family reunion that it was.
Yeah, exactly. Now, you guys, I feel like do love the Crushers because, like you said, you brought her back in season 1. That was the first time we saw Beverly since Nemesis, right? And then now you bring
Yes.
back Wesley and now even baby Jack. So, what is it about the Crusher family that you feel that makes them so special in the franchise?
Well, I'll start by saying TNG was my gateway Star Trek. Literally my first memory as a child, I was maybe 3 or 4, was sitting on the couch with my dad as these, the saucer separation occurred as the sweeping fanfare played. And so I love TNG outright. And, I think Wesley was originally added by Gene Roddenberry to be sort of like a surrogate in some ways for young people like me to watch and say, hey, I can do great things too. It's not just the adults. So however people may have initially felt about his character, being a wonderkind and doing everything that the adults couldn't, I was right there for it. And I was like, cool, he's a prodigy. Awesome. He's on the bridge. He's joining the crew.
Yeah.
I love it. And I was almost surprised to hear that at one point that not everyone felt that way, because I love them as you do. And I think that in a way it could the holistically, I think the Crusher family contributed something very interesting to the Star Trek mythos, because TOS, to my knowledge, didn't have any families, or very many families. I think at one point there's like a wedding that they officiate on the original series, but there was no families living aboard the Enterprise. And that to me was like, oh, that's the future. The future is we don't have to be confined, by the mortal coils of Earth, and that home is not a place, it's who you're with. And you can live a satisfactory life while also being aboard a science vessel that's dedicated towards curiosity and wonder and discovery. And I think, in a very sort of abstract way, I found that very inspirational, and I wanted to see more of that. Listen, I love the paramilitary sort of like, fire, photon torpedo stuff. It's great. But I think the heart of Star Trek is in those little moments with families in 10 forward, having conversations about the next holosuite thing, or what's wrong with Worf, and in many ways, I think that relationship that we saw with the Crushers embodied that.
Yeah, for sure.
Any for your thoughts?
Now, I actually have a couple of fan questions that I want to get before we leave. First one is from Chris, and he's from First Flight Podcast. And his question is, Prodigy fits perfectly into established canon. How does adhering to canon enrich the storytelling process as you crafted both seasons of Prodigy?
That's a great question. I think sometimes canon can be intimidating in that Star Trek, with the exception of Doctor Who, I think is one of the longest running continuity-wise science fiction franchises that exists, where 60 years of television ostensibly all takes place in one universe, and everything counts and everything happens. But to me, that's exciting, because that's just world building, I've never had any fear or problem with playing with the toys I've given, if I'm allowed to bring in other toys as well. And, and I think that the canon of Star Trek in particular is so ingrained, not only in me and many of the writers, but I think in pop culture, we didn't want to do it a disservice by just completely ignoring it. And as I've alluded to before, a big part of the premise of our show is, starting very small in a very remote place and gradually opening up that world of Star Trek to new audiences. And so canon, if anything, is a chance for us to do that and help it all feel as a whole. And and I think that's not even a new idea. I think the Berman era, Picard was on the first episode of Deep Space Nine, and Voyager launched from Deep Space Nine. Like it all connects in a way that to, I think, viewers in the 90s, that was the original shared universe. And I think showing new audiences the wonders of that was of paramount importance for us.
Yeah. Now, our next question from Rachel was, there anything you got pushed back on or had to change to keep the show kid friendly?
Yeah, there's been a few, not many though. First I want to say that like the creative executives at Nickelodeon and CBS were phenomenal and are. They very little did they ever push back, and if anything, it was just clarity questions of just like, how did they find that burned chip that was on the protostars? Like, oh, it was in a black box with a beacon on it, and they're like, great, put a beacon on it, stuff like that. But in terms of like, what's kind of referring to what's known as standards and practices, which is like, is it imitatable? Is it scary? Too scary? Very little did that really come into play. Maybe it's just because Star Trek always is a little bit kind of fanciful, even when a red shirt gets vaporized or something.
Right.
They just turn into like Halloween skeletons and you move on.
Yeah. I mean, conspiracy in TNG, that was a bit much.
Yeah. I mean, that's talk about body horror for sure.
Just a little bit.
But there were a couple instances that I can think of. Like one, I remember there's a really wonderful episode in season 1 called Time Amok, in which the protostar crew get trapped in this sort of like not fractured time where each of them has to solve a warp core breach before it explodes, but they have different amounts of time to do so.
Yeah.
And so we initially got pushback on that episode for a couple of reasons. One, we just had a bunch of young people exploding on a ship over and over again. and B, the second issue. Yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
But then the second issue was we originally had written in how long Rock had been in her time sort of anomaly. And it was they were like, you can't keep her in there for that long. And so the answer which they were fine with, and to their great credit, once they saw how we executed it, they were like, note rescinded. This is beautiful. Because we made it clear that it was about hope. Like it was about like, if you can't do it, you rely on the rest of you, the rest of your team, the rest of your crew to achieve what you cannot. And together we'll pull each other out of this seemingly impossible situation. And then the other way we addressed it was like, we just took out how long she'd been and said she was in there for too long, which ironically I think made it worse. But they're fine. And then in season 2, I don't think we got much of any S&P pushback. The only one I can remember is there's a scene with the Doctor when he's fighting off the loom and protecting the young cadets, and he pulls out his hypo spray. And in the original one, in the original version, I think he was like saying, take 10 milligrams of anesthetine and 50 milligrams of cetrazine, and nothing was working. But they didn't want kids going into their medicine cabinets and spraying, eating medicine. So they said, can you just be something a little bit more dramatic? And that's when we came up with eat 20 milligrams of vengeance, you otherworldly tyrant. And that was how we addressed that one.
So our next question is from Abby. She says, now that you're a dad, has it changed or deepened any of your thoughts and feelings about your work on Prodigy?
It has, I think, especially with the world being as fractured and strange and uncertain as it seems to be every day. I find myself sort of clinging to like, what can I do as an individual, both as a father and a citizen and just a moral human, to make the world a better place for my daughter. And I think the one thing I know that stories can still do is to inspire. And so I think with Star Trek in particular, Star Trek inspired me and helped kind of mold me into the person that I am today. My ethical kind of groundwork and my personal outlook and philosophy on the unknown shouldn't be scary. It should be a challenge and an opportunity to grow and learn more about ourselves, and reaching out to cultures different than ourselves, and finding that common ground, and helping others without any assumption of return, I think are all very Starfleet ideals. And I think it's something that I'm glad that we put it into this season, and I will probably continue to do so into all of my work, because I think sincerity and hope are cool, man. Like, there's enough jaded cynicism in the world. Like, just dream of a better tomorrow and getting there with your fellow humans here on Spaceship Earth.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I've learned a lot just from Star Trek these last couple of years and grown into like a better person. And it's amazing how you can learn something from like that. But that's why I created the podcast, because I felt like Crusher just had those qualities that Star Trek represents. Right. So, it was, it's been interesting for me in my journey, just from learning from Star Trek, so yeah, I completely agree with everything that you said.
Yeah, I think Star Trek in particular, they have a very good track record of showing young people coming into their own and achieving things, even if the road is surprising or not what they expected when they started out. I think Wesley Crusher is a great example of that. But even Nog or Jake Sisko, or so many others.
Seven's story.
Or Seven's story. Yeah. She was very young when she became a Borg, and I think at least initially thought that was her collective, and grew to widen her purview in that.
Yeah.
And it's my sincere hope that Star Trek Prodigy can become that gateway or gatesway for so many other young people to kind of find some reflection of what's possible for themselves.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, Aaron, I am so thankful for you to be joining me tonight. I appreciate your time. Hoping for season 3, and not gonna lie, I hope for more Beverly, but we'll see. She's in season 1 and 2. I mean,
that's true.
Keep the track going.
You gotta keep the streak going. Yeah, never say never. If we have a character model and we have somebody who's already been on our show, and everyone who's been on our show, they've been treated very respectfully, and I think they're very happy with how it turned out. So I'm hoping we can just keep adding to our collective, as it were.
Yes, no, I can't wait. I've enjoyed Prodigy so much. It's such a great show. So, but again, thank you guys again for all of this. So
live long and prosper.
Yeah. And that's it, guys. It was awesome to sit down with Aaron and talk about Beverly and Wesley Crusher and just what Star Trek means to him. It was an amazing experience, and I feel honored to be able to have a sit down with him. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. If you guys want more Crusher Convo content, please subscribe here on YouTube, like this video, and also if you want to buy me a coffee, you may be able to do that right over here. Be able to scan that code and buy me a coffee, one-time gift or a monthly gift, whatever you're feeling, however you want to support the show. Also, if you want to hit me up, I am on Threads and Instagram at Crusher Convo. And yeah, I'm just posting my videos and doing what I can. I have been blessed this month with my interviews with John Billingsley, with Dayton Ward, and now Aaron Waltke. And we're just about to hit our 2-year anniversary. So thank you guys so much. Really appreciate all the support. Really appreciate Aaron for taking his time with me today and talking about Beverly and gushing about the Crushers. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it. See you next time. Live long and prosper.
Crusher out.